Okay, welcome everybody. We're happy to have you here. I want to, before I introduce Daniel, I'd like to talk a little bit about our program that we've kicked off called HELM. It's Habitat Enhanced Land Management. We have a couple of people from the team, the HELM team on here. We also have people who have had visits from us. The program is designed so we visit landowners and talk to them about their land. Let me see, we've done 8 visits so far. It's very easy. We talk to them about their land. We identify invasives and natives. Let me share my screen with you real quick. We talk to them about things like erosion. We talk to people about invasives. We talk to people about oak wilt. We talk to people about the native plants they have. We talk to people about wildlife and attracting wildlife, and just lots of other things. You can easily request a visit, and it's a matter of going to our beautiful HayesCounty.org website, and this is what you're going to see on the website is this Habitat Enhanced Land Management. You can put in that long URL, or you can go to the main page, and at the bottom it'll say Habitat Enhanced Land Management, and if you click that, you'll get to this form. And if you fill out the form and answer the questions, there'll be an email that actually comes to me right now, and I will put together a team. We're usually doing about 3 people to come visit your property, talk to you. And actually the visit on Monday, I understand, was 3 hours. We usually try to make it about an hour or 2 hours, to walk the land and all that. We'll walk the land with you, look around, answer your questions, and then we follow up with a report with both some of the things we talked about and also maybe some additional information that we decide to look for, because we want to give you even more information and we just didn't have it off the top of our heads. We teach you how to use iNaturalist, that's really it. So if you want to visit, we're targeting mostly properties in the 5 to 30 acres, but we'll do smaller or larger properties if you want. Daniel grew up on the Frio River, and he happens to be a graduate of Washington University in St. Louis. And did you know I graduated? I got a master's degree from there, Daniel.
I did not.
So we have something in common. Here it comes. Here. He's worked with private landowners. You can see he worked for the Tamarisk Coalition.
You got it.
And coordinated with the Dolores River Restoration Partnership in Southwest Colorado and Eastern Utah, and for the Nueces River Authority on riparian restoration projects. And now he works for HCA, and he works with private landowners, agencies, and nonprofit partners and communities to enhance riparian habitat and watershed health, and to foster regional collaboration and stewardship across watersheds, and to increase private land conservation in the hill country. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Daniel.
Everyone, thank you so much for inviting me to join y'all this evening. Since we've got a smaller group, I want this to be as informal and interactive as y'all want it to be, which is to say, interrupt me, throw something in the chat, unmute yourself if you have a question, and let's make tonight a fun, interactive conversation. So Chris asked me here this evening to talk to you a little bit about land stewardship, and specifically how to repair land that presumably needs repairing. Again, I work for the Hill Country Alliance, and our organization works across 17 counties throughout the Central Texas Hill Country to conserve the things that make this the beautiful place we know and love. Our programs focus on issues related to land, water, night skies, and communities. and I am our land program manager. If you are not familiar with the Hill Country Alliance, check us out at hillcountryalliance.org. We have a great newsletter that comes out 1 to 2 times a year. I'm sorry, 1 to 2 times a month. It includes all the conservation news happening across the region, as well as a variety of educational opportunities that not only HCA, but all of our partners are hosting. So sign up for that neighbor to neighbor newsletter at hillcountryalliance.org. All right, so this evening, what is the game plan? Well, my hope is that you'll learn a thing or two. I'm going to cover a lot of ground. Some of these will be items that you're already familiar with, but hopefully some of it is new. So I hope you remember something new and exciting that takes you out to the property tomorrow and perhaps challenges you to look at your place a little differently. And while I hope you learn a few things and that tomorrow you're excited to get out and walk the property and see things differently, I don't want anyone to run out and start spraying plants and moving rocks and soil and just going hog wild. I hope today you walk away really with some things to think over and to really deliberate on before you start implementing projects and plans. So again, Chris asked me to talk about repairing your land. It's not my land, it is yours. And so I'm going to share with you 3 elements, 3 steps that go into repairing land, and they might sound rudimentary and perhaps just totally obvious, but you'd be surprised. People typically will skip at least one of these steps. And so the first step, before you start investing blood, sweat, tears, and potentially financial resources, you want to be clear on your goals for your property. What are you trying to do when you are repairing it, healing it, restoring it, rehabilitating it? Are you trying to reduce fuel loads? Are you trying to provide the best wild turkey habitat? What are the goals? What are we trying to do here? What does success look like? And that's up to you as the landowner to decide what your goals and values are. Once you've done that, you can come up with your game plan or your implementation plan that says, these are the practices, these are the methods that I'm going to implement to be successful towards those goals. Third, is the idea that this work, this game plan, stewardship is an ongoing process, perhaps even a multi-generational process. And so especially after those initial years where you've really put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, you want to protect that investment. And so that means continuing to walk the property to do some basic monitoring and maintenance so that you are protecting that upfront intensive stewardship investment. So this evening, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the background of the Hill Country. I suspect we all know these tidbits, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. And then as far as healing or repairing the land, I'm going to talk about 2 common examples. That's managing erosion as well as managing non-native invasive plants. I'd like to highlight a few resources that are available to you as private landowners and have a discussion. And again, since we're a small group this evening, don't be shy. Feel free to throw something in the chat and or take yourself off mute and ask a question, and we'll make it fun and interactive. Again, I'm going to be talking for about 45 minutes. Chris, please cut me off if I go any longer. And with that amount of time, again, I'm just scratching the surface. There are so many important topics that are related to land health and repairing our properties, but given the time frame, it's just not realistic to go into them. But if you want to get into some of these topics during the Q&A at the end, we can go wherever is of interest and help to y'all in your stewardship. So while your goals as a landowner will be unique to you and your property, our hope is that they are consistent with the idea of land health. And so when we think about land health, I like to look at this picture from Steve Nelly that has just a really great abundance and diversity of healthy plants in the Hill Country. And when we've got a landscape that has that, vigorous, diverse, and abundant plant community, that's going to act like a sponge. If we were to get 5 inches of rain, I suspect that property could really act like a sponge and slow and sink that water. So when our land is healthy, we're going to be able to grow those palatable, healthy, vigorous plants, whether that's for wildlife and or livestock. Looking at all that plant material, that biomass, it's going to slow down and dissipate energy from rainfall. In so doing, it's going to help alleviate some of the force and energy of flooding. That water, when it's racing down the hill or trying to race down the hill, it's going to be carrying particles of soil. So if we can slow and sink them, we're going to trap that sediment, thus enlarging this sponge and preventing or reducing erosion. Again, that sponge is going to store water in the land, ultimately feeding the groundwater and the aquifers beneath our feet, which will then reemerge through springs. And for folks in Hays County, it'll feed into what is most likely the Blanco River. The Pedernales flows through there as well. So again, healthy lands are important no matter what our goals and values. Healthy lands provide so many benefits for us, the folks up and downstream of us, and really society at large. So a little background on the hill country. Again, I suspect most of us know this, but really to set the stage, the hill country is often referred to as flash flood alley, and that's due to a variety of factors, including our thin soils, our topography, and our weather patterns. This is a photo from the 2018 October flood on the Llano River. You can see just some tremendous water that's really challenging the infrastructure there in Kingsland. That was when the town ultimately lost its iconic bridge. So we have these incredibly powerful and destructive floods that come in. And here's that same river, the Llano River. When we're not flooding, oftentimes we're in an incredibly dry period or a drought. We also know that in the hill country, that limestone beneath our feet is porous, it is cracked, it has caves, it has fissures. And so a single raindrop can find itself in this dynamic process of becoming surface and groundwater back and forth, and ultimately emerge here in a tributary of the Blanco River. But even once that raindrop is flowing down the Blanco River, it can fall through a crack again and go back down into the aquifer. So this really dynamic interaction of surface and groundwater throughout the hill country. And really the intermediary between all these processes that in many ways define the hill country is soil. And so again, I talked earlier about land and soil as a sponge. If we can maintain or enhance and repair the health of our soil, that is going to do a variety of things, including soaking up and storing water, thus mitigating floods, storing that water for drier times, and ultimately feeding our springs and creeks. So let's talk for a moment about soil. Hopefully you have some. As you go across the hill country, some folks like here, this is not too far from where I live in the Pedernales River Basin in Gillespie County, there's quite a bit of soil in this valley. If you go to other properties, you might find some caliche. And so there's a lot of variety across the hill country, and there's a number of factors that explain that. Just as we're learning a lot about the microorganisms in our bodies and our guts, we're also learning a lot about the living organisms beneath our feet in the soil. We're learning that they're important for things like the health of our plant communities, for decomposition, for the water cycle, and so much more. And so as we're thinking about how do we repair, how do we heal our lands, our properties, I think a really important place to start is with our soil. A friend of mine, a colleague who some of you may know, Pete Van Dyke, has a great saying, bare ground is public enemy number one. And the reason why bare ground is so undesirable is because if you look at the picture on the left-hand side, you'll see that when a raindrop collides with bare ground, it can dislodge those soil particles, and in so doing, set up a domino effect of what can lead to quite a bit of erosion down a hillside and into a creek or river. If you look at the photograph to the right, these are different land treatments, from bare ground on the left to what on the far right is a diverse, healthy portion of native bunch grasses. And when water is applied to each of these treatments, you can see the bare ground has both a lot of fast runoff and a lot of sediment carried off that piece right there. Whereas on the far right, you see little runoff. In other words, the land is acting like a sponge, absorbing that water. And not only is there little runoff of the water, but very little soil is being carried off as well. I'm going to duplicate this slide because a speaker in this series said something great about a month or two ago that I thought was worth restating. Ricky Lennox said that a raindrop hitting bare soil is like a small bomb. And so as we're thinking about how do we heal, how do we restore our land, I think a good place to start is considering if we have any bare ground on our properties and what current or historic disturbances might explain why that bare ground is there. All right. So we talked about the importance of plants covering the ground. They're going to prevent that raindrop from dislodging soil and causing erosion. But plants also are really important in terms of their link to this community of microorganisms beneath our feet. Through photosynthesis, these plants are able to provide sugars or energy to a variety of microorganisms like bacteria and fungi. And then those microorganisms in return can provide the plants with water and nutrients and other resources. So just as we think about an ecosystem, whether it's a forest or a grassland ecosystem, there's very much a dynamic ecosystem happening beneath our very feet. That begs the question of, well, so what? These things are so tiny. I don't know what they look like. I've never really seen them under a microscope. So what? Who cares? Well, those microorganisms like bacteria and fungi help us out in a variety of ways. One, I'm going to actually go back for a second. They, through their weaving together with one another in the roots of those plants, they provide the very physical structure of our soil. Bacteria can bind very small bits of soil, which we call aggregates, together, and the fungi can bind together larger aggregates, think like cottage cheese. And so they are binding particles of soil together, creating the very physical structure and integrity of what's beneath our feet, and also creating that porous space where we can have oxygen as well as water when we have a good rain event filling in. In addition to providing the very physical structure of the soil, these microorganisms in healthy soils can help us really bolster the sponge that is slowing and soaking up water to help us again during times of flood as well as drought. And here's a remarkable figure from the Natural Resources Conservation Service, where if we can increase 1 acre, the soil organic matter across 1 acre by 1%, when we think of organic matter, that can be things like leaf litter, compost, cow manure, even an old Christmas tree. If we can increase the organic matter that feeds those microorganisms by 1% on 1 acre, we can enhance the structure and health of that soil such that it can basically hold on to 25,000 more gallons of water in that 1 acre. So just think of the folks on this call, although we're a small and mighty bunch, if we can increase the soil organic matter on each of our properties, that's going to scale up and have some real benefits. I'm going to pause for just a second. Are there any questions? Are there anything in the chat worth checking in on, Betsy or Chris?
Nothing in the chat, Daniel, so far.
All right, I'm gonna keep rolling. So I hope that I've illustrated that soil health is important. It's important for a variety of reasons. And so it's a huge topic. We're learning a lot every day. But there's really a set of guiding principles that can help us sort of at a big picture level think about how we on our own properties can improve the health of the soil, whatever state it's at. The first is to reduce physical and chemical disturbances like tilling. I'm not saying don't do any disturbances, but to the extent that you can reduce them, you're going to preserve the integrity, the physical structure, and the biological community beneath your feet. We want to maximize soil cover. Again, bare ground is public enemy number one. And so if we can cover the soil, whether that's with mulch or leaf clippings, logs, cedar slash, that's going to help provide some armor and protect what might otherwise be bare ground. We want to increase biodiversity. Plants, different species of plants have different roots in terms of their size and shape and structure. And so the greater diversity we can have above ground is going to help feed a diversity of microorganisms below ground. And we want to maximize the presence of living roots. Again, through photosynthesis, these plants are providing sugars to this whole community below our feet. And so think about having not just warm season, but cool season plants as well. So that photosynthesis is happening throughout the year. Sugars are being exchanged for water and nutrients. So we've got healthy plant as well as soil communities on our properties. And to the extent possible, let's integrate animals. You know, maybe you're on, Chris mentioned the 3 to 50 acre program that they're working on. You know, perhaps there's an opportunity if you have a rancher who lives next to you and you share a fence and a gate, perhaps there's an opportunity to bring livestock onto the property for a very short amount of time to incorporate the hoof action and the manure and the urine from those animals. Maybe that's not an option where you live or something you may not be comfortable with. There are other options like compost and vermicast, other materials that you can add to your soil to, again, feed those microorganisms and ultimately improve the overall health of your property. So some of you might have looked at that picture that I showed earlier and that is reproduced at the top left and said, okay, great, that person's got, 4 feet of soil. I really don't have any. I'm on a caliche hill, so how does this apply to me? So I'm going to transition now and talk about a few methods where we can take a site like the one here that's pretty bare, not entirely bare. It's got some native ash juniper and it's got a few bunch grasses here and there, but there's quite a bit of exposed caliche. How do we take something like that and start to slow and sink water, trap more sediment, and build up the soil profile? So in a moment, I'm going to show you this same site, and this is from Pete Van Dyke in Drought-Proof Texas. It's the same site. He just used some methods that fundamentally slow and sink water to take it from this to this. And so what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is I'm going to highlight a few simple methods for slowing and sinking water. Again, the idea of slowing and sinking water is that when a raindrop is racing down the hill, it will be dislodging soil particles and ultimately having the potential to cause erosion. We don't want to lose the soil. We want to trap it. We want to build up that sponge, that soil and land sponge. And so I'm going to talk about a few simple methods that we can use that many landowners are already using. But before I do that, we need to think a little bit about erosion and how it actually takes place across the landscape. It's worth stepping back and thinking about where your property is, wherever it is on the hillside, thinking about where it is in the larger watershed, whether you're in the Blanco, the Pedernales, wherever you are. Where do you fit? Is that erosion starting on your place? Perhaps it's starting up the hill 3 property lines away. And so we need to think about, where is it starting? How do I fit into this larger process? And what are those underlying stressors or sources of erosion? There's different kinds of erosion. There's what we refer to as splash erosion. That was, think back to that picture of that raindrop hitting bare ground. That's when that single raindrop is dislodging soil. And we can go from splash erosion to sheet erosion, which you can see at the top of the hill. This is where you have sort of an even, uniform layer of water moving across the landscape. Often this happens because the soil is really compacted, so the water is not able to percolate. Instead, it's just moving across the landscape. Ultimately, that sheet erosion is going to find a drop in elevation. When it does, that even flow is going to start to find spots where it drops in elevation and converges into what we call rills. A rill is sort of like a smaller gully. It might be 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches deep. As the water continues to move down the hill and gain greater force and energy, those rills can then coalesce and form gullies, which again are sort of these trenches that can be 4 inches, and they can even be 4 feet and deeper. And once you have those, that's some serious erosion at play that's going to take some real work to manage and heal. So let's start with a few simple strategies for slowing and sinking water. So we're reducing erosion, we're enhancing the health of the land, of the soil. We're going to start here with rows of rocks. This is a property out in Bandera County, which is a bit drier than probably what y'all have in Hayes County. This landowner, all she did in an afternoon was she took a heavy duty rake and she went out and with this rake one afternoon, simply raked a row of rocks to follow the contour lines along the hillside. Before she did this, this was a couple of years ago, that was bare caliche. And so this picture, I'm not saying that the site is perfect and totally healed, but just by creating this row of rocks that followed the natural contour line of that hillside, this landowner was able to slow down and sink water. When you do that, that water is going to deposit the soil that it's carrying. And here you can see that enough soil has deposited where several species of native bunch grasses have established on their own. So this is a really simple, low budget strategy that you can use to heal a degraded upland. And I think this is a great example of what it takes to start the healing process. Here's that same landowner on a different part of their property. Here, they had selectively thinned some native ash juniper, and they did a few things. One is they used the larger logs from that ash juniper that they thinned to, rather than use rows of rocks, create rows of logs, again, following the contour lines of the hillsides, which I've tried to outline approximately in yellow. They also used a very, very thin layer of cedar mulch or slash, and then they broadcast some native grass seed. Again, the site is not totally perfect. There's still some bare ground, but the fact that this was an overgrazed, disturbed rangeland, that through this use of seeding, logs, and thin layer of mulch, you can see that there's quite a bit of bunch grass that's already established and germinating. So again, a really compelling and simple example of how we can start to heal some of our degraded uplands. I mentioned the contour lines. For some of us, it's easy to see these, especially if you're a great golfer and you know how to read the green before you're putting. It might be intuitive for you. There are a variety of tools and strategies that we can use to identify the contour lines, which is to say to understand the topography along our properties. On the right is a device called a laser level, which you can use to, again, flag these contour lines, which can then inform where and how you build those rows of logs and or rocks. These devices can be expensive, and so You can either pool resources with your neighbors if that's something that there's a shared interest in doing, or you can also schedule a site visit with your local natural resources conservation service district conservationist, and more than likely they will have one of these laser levels to help you flag out contour lines in an area you're trying to heal.
Yeah, Daniel?
Yes, ma'am.
One of the things we are providing the landowners is a contour map of their property with either 2-foot or 5-foot contours. That can also be, they can also use that as a guide if they get it from us.
That's great. A last strategy, which I touched on briefly a moment ago, is if you're going to be doing some thinning or removal of ash juniper, that wood is a great resource. I could give a whole talk on all the things you can do with that woody material, but one of them is you can use it as a mulch on the land. If you do this, make sure you don't do it too thick, no more than a couple inches deep. If you go beyond, say, 3-4 inches of slash, you're really going to impede some grass germination. But again, leaving some of this slash or mulch on the ground is a great way to protect it so you don't have bare soil, and ultimately allow other plants to establish. In other presentations that I've hosted, I've spent a lot of time on some advanced strategies. I'm just going to flag them. If during the Q&A folks want to get into these, we can certainly do that, but we've got a lot of ground to cover. So I'm just going to flag them so that you know that these strategies exist. And again, if we want to revisit them or if you have questions afterwards, you can send me an email. In some places, you know, we've got gullies. We've got, you can see here a drop in the elevation of a couple of feet. And here's another site where, I mean, that's a big gully, and that's a really complicated site. And so I'm not suggesting that there are easy solutions, but there definitely are practices and methods that can be used to address these types of sites. And so just to give a few examples, here's a structure that we call a rock rundown, which was fit into the site that I showed just a moment ago. This is something that we call a Zuni bowl. And here's something called a Media Luna. Here's a landowner who's used a set of berms and swales. Again, these are more complicated strategies that take some due diligence and real thought before you implement them. But I'm just letting you know that there are some advanced strategies for addressing highly eroded sites.
And Daniel, you
Yes.
have some PDFs that I can provide if people want them that are on the, that have some of these strategies, that talk about some of these strategies. You got 2 PDFs I think you sent me.
Absolutely. Yes, we've got one resource that is entirely focused on these advanced strategies. So feel free to reach out to Chris or myself. Happy to share those with you. So before I shift over to non-native invasive plants, I just wanted to highlight a few resources if you want to learn more about how to manage erosion on your property. There's a great nonprofit out of New Mexico called the Quivira Coalition. If you go to their website and click on technical resources, they have a bunch of materials, including from Bill Zedike, who has really mastered a lot of these structures using rock. Check them out. There's also the Soil for Water program. They have some great resources on their website for how you can improve soil health. I mentioned the Natural Resources Conservation Service earlier. Again, if you wanted to have someone out to help you flag out your contour lines, every county has an NRCS office that serves them, so you could reach out to them. There's a great nonprofit based just upstream from y'all in Blanco County called Earth Repair Corps. They teach on a lot of these methods using a permaculture framework. And then Chris had mentioned the mapping. Both the U.S. Geologic Survey and the Texas Forest Service provide some phenomenal free mapping resources that you as a landowner can use to start to evaluate and think about your property in perhaps new spatial ways. So make sure to check out those agencies' websites. And of course, the Hill Country Alliance, as Chris mentioned, we have several what we call Hillside stewardship resources that flesh out both the simple and advanced strategies for slowing and sinking water on those uplands. So now I believe I'm going to transition, to non-native invasive plants. They have a variety of names. Sometimes they're called exotic or alien species. Sometimes there's euphemisms like improved species, or they have all sorts of names. Anyone know what the one is here in this picture?
Bastard cabbage.
Yes, ma'am.
Right.
Yeah.
Indeed. Thank you, Renee. Yes, that is bastard cabbage. So what is a non-native invasive plant? Well, as the name would suggest, it is non-native, which is to say it's not from here, from the hill country or from any adjacent ecoregions. Oftentimes, these come from entirely different continents. And so the fact that that's the part that makes them non-native. And then if they're invasive, that means you don't just see one or two of them, but they have the ability really to proliferate, as you see with the bastard cabbage in this picture. So where did they come from? Depending on the species, it could have come from any number of continents. A lot of our non-native invasive species come from Eurasia. And how did they get to Hays County? Well, there's a variety of reasons. Sometimes they were brought here on purpose, perhaps as ornamentals, perhaps for erosion control. But in other cases, they came here on someone's shoelace or perhaps in a cargo shipment and totally by accident, unbeknownst to people. So sometimes on purpose, sometimes by accident, but the end result is the same, that they are here in the landscape. And the question then is, what do we do about it? Usually I would make this pretty interactive, but I think we're all still on mute, and if we want to stay on mute, that's fine. But one of the things that makes them so invasive is because they aren't native to, in this case, the hill country, they don't have their natural diseases and predators. The stressors from their native ecosystem are not here. And so without those limiting factors, they are really able to proliferate and at times outcompete native species. Not always, but sometimes. So why should we care? I'm just going to throw these out really quickly. There's a variety of ecological reasons. I've already touched on the fact that some of these non-native invasive species can displace native vegetation, degrade habitat. If it's a species with a short or weak root system, it can exacerbate erosion. But this isn't just an ecological issue. This is can be a social and economic set of issues as well. If we use the land for agriculture, for gardening, that can be a real hit to the economics. If we're trying to maintain an area for public or private access and recreation, there's a number of species that can impede our ability to enjoy the property. Some species like Arundo donax, which I'll show in a moment, can pose a real risk in terms of wildfire. And so non-native invasive plants, I'm not trying to say that we need to declare war on them, but there are certainly situations where they can cause some serious ecological, social, and economic impacts that we need to be aware of. And aesthetics too, especially with that bastard cabbage. They can outcompete some of our favorite native wildflowers. And so again, a whole host of reasons why we might care. The reasons for controlling them, again, they're ecological, they're social, and they're probably going to be tied to whatever your specific goals or values are for your property. And in certain situations, we may need to manage them to improve the overall land health and function. But on the flip side, if we have bare ground and the only thing that's growing there or nearby is a non-native invasive plant, I think that beckons us to step back and think about what function that non-native invasive plant is providing in terms of protecting soil. And so there's a little bit of nuance here that I just want to flag, and we can get into that later in Q&A. And then one message that I really want to underscore, and hopefully I remember to emphasize this later, is that killing weeds should not be the end goal. To give an example, if the goal is to kill, in the earlier case, bastard cabbage, and we kill it, but then we just replace it with multi-star thistle, another non-native invasive, were we successful? Probably not. So the managing of non-native invasive plants should fit into your larger stewardship goals. Perhaps it's tied to a goal to enhance soil health, or to enhance wildlife habitat, to reduce wildfire risks. There might be any number of reasons, but killing, controlling, managing non-native invasive weeds is a step. It's a step towards, or should be a step towards, a larger goal. It's not the end. It's not the end goal, or shouldn't be. So I'm just going to list a few common non-native invasive plants that you all have probably encountered in Hays County. Again, this is not comprehensive, but in terms of trees, Chinaberry, ligustrum, Chinese tallow, and Christ thorn are common in Hays County and across much of the hill country. In terms of forbs, we've got Brazilian vervain, musk thistle, and multi-star thistle. Some grasses, KR blue stem, Arundo donax, and Johnson grass, all common. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to pick one of each of these categories to talk about some management strategies. I'm going to pause because I see someone sent something in the chat. Betsy, do you want to read out those questions, or do you want to wait? I'll defer to you.
No, we can, if you're good for it, we should go ahead and grab these questions.
Let's do it.
Linda is asking, what about ash juniper? You referred to it as a native. Perhaps you just meant it was present at the site.
Yes. So I could give an entire presentation on ash juniper. If you'd like to email me afterwards, we can talk in more detail. But very long story short, ash juniper is a native species to the Texas Hill Country. It's been here long before we ever got here. And while there are certainly reasons to manage it, it provides a number of values in terms of wildlife, soil health, all sorts of values. And so if we want during the Q&A to dive into that, we can. But ash juniper is definitely a native plant. It can become arguably invasive in certain contexts, but it is a native species. And we want to be thoughtful about where and how we manage it. And again, I can go into that later. Was there a second question, Betsy?
Yeah, there's one more question about, are there pictures of these invasives? Or we might ask that question, where could we get some references on these invasives?
Y'all are teeing me up beautifully. Yes, we're going to get into that right now. So I'm going to talk about just a few. I'm going to give one example of an invasive non-native tree, the Chinaberry. I'm going to talk about multi-star thistle as an example of a non-native forb. And then we'll talk about Arundo donax as an example of a grass. And then I'll highlight a great resource where you can look at pictures of the rest of these and many more. But before I show those pictures, I just want to highlight the idea of integrated pest management. There are many people who have come before us who have tried to manage and control these invasive species. There are effective ways to do this. There are ineffective ways. And so integrated pest management is the idea that we have a lot of tools in the toolbox. And so depending on the species, depending on the infestation, depending on your goals, we want to pick the right tool or the right set of tools to effectively control those non-native invasive plants and improve the overall land health of our property. And so we can use chemical control or herbicide. We can use physical control, whether that's a large piece of machinery or a small hatchet, such as Tony has in the picture. Biological control can be using animals like sheep or goats. There's cultural approaches, which is to say education, raising awareness about these species and why they may be an issue. And again, long-term monitoring and maintenance. Anyone who's tried to manage non-native invasive plants knows that it's seldom, if ever, a one and done. This is something that you always need to be walking the property and check for any remaining infestations and attending to them accordingly. So a few pictures. First is the example of the Chinaberry tree. Step one, make sure it's a Chinaberry tree. I've heard quite a few stories of landowners who had good intentions, great energy, ready to go control an invasive plant, and perhaps they only remembered one of the visual cues and wound up killing a bunch of native desirable species on their property. So the first step is always make sure you are controlling the species that you are intending to control. Chinaberry, this picture on the left is really timely. They are putting out these little flowers, at least where I live, they're putting out these flowers right now. So they've got those white purple flowers, these complex leaf structures with serrated leaflets. Of course, an endless supply of berries, as their name would suggest. And then if you look at the picture on the right, their young branches will typically have this sort of speckled pattern. And sometimes the bark can almost look subtly purple. Chinaberry is actually part of the mahogany family. It's a beautiful wood. But anyways, here's some pictures of what a Chinaberry tree looks like. So once you know that, in fact, it's a Chinaberry tree and that you've decided it's something that you need to control, there's a variety of control methods. If it's small, which is to say, maybe knee high or waist high, you can simply hand pull the seedlings and hopefully remove all the root material. You can use what's referred to as a cut stump method. A cut stump method requires two steps. One is that you cut the tree down, whether that's a handsaw or a chainsaw, and then you need to apply a mixture of diesel and an herbicide called triclopyr. The trade name for that is Remedy. And you need to apply that mixture. It's 3 parts diesel, 1 part triclopyr immediately after cutting down the tree. If you cut it down, go inside, have a glass of lemonade, and come out a couple hours later to apply the herbicide mix, that tree could have already started to sort of calcify and it won't readily absorb that mixture as well. So if you're doing a cut stump method, it's important to do the cut and then apply the mixture of diesel and Remedy or triclopyr immediately after the cut. That's a method you can do any time of year and it's pretty effective. Another method is what's called a basal bark treatment. This is applying an herbicide typically to the bottom 1.5 feet of the tree trunk. A fourth option is what's referred to as girdling. This is, if you look at the picture on the left, what you do is you cut through the bark and into the cambium layer, and you cut all the way around the full circumference of the tree, which impedes the tree's ability to transport nutrients, and over time it is going to whittle away and hopefully die. If it's a large enough tree, the neat thing is you're creating a standing snag habitat for woodpeckers and other critters. What you see in this picture is that below the girdle, some small stems sprouted below the cut, but oftentimes what will happen is you'll get a few resprouts below the cut, but these things aren't going to germinate seed. And so this is a really easy way, if you've just got a hatchet or a handsaw, easy way, especially for folks who aren't comfortable with herbicides, great way to control this particular species of tree. You can also use a girdle and apply an herbicide within the girdle. And then you can use one more method, which I skipped, which is called a hack and squirt, which is what's illustrated on the picture to the right, where you are using triclopyr, again, the name brand is Remedy. Here they've mixed the herbicide with a blue dye so that it's easy to recognize which trees have already been treated. And all you do is you take a hatchet, you make a cut into the tree, through the bark, into the cambium layer, apply a squirt of herbicide, and you do that periodically around the tree. Simple way for one person without heavy equipment to control a Chinaberry tree. And again, that monitoring and maintenance piece, continuing to go out to the property to see how those treatments are doing, and perhaps do some follow-up treatments the next year. So this is an example where one species, you've actually got a lot of effective, somewhat easy options for controlling that non-native invasive species. Unfortunately, not all species provide such a menu of options, but I like to start with Chinaberry because it gives a great purview into the variety of ways you can control it. The next, so now we're shifting from an example of a tree to a forb. These pictures also are just perfectly timed for right now. The picture on the right is how the multi-star thistle are looking right now around where I live. Had I given this presentation 2 months ago, I would have underscored the picture on the left. This is a great resource that the folks at Native American Seed put together. So during the late winter, early spring, as forbs, your thistles, your wildflowers are starting to emerge, they emerge as what are called basal rosettes. So just these little green configurations, these rosettes on the ground. And this is a great resource that helps you identify that multi-star thistle on the left with the round leaf tip when you can easily remove it with a shovel without mistaking it for something like an Indian blanket or a cutleaf daisy. So again, the first step is always make sure it's the non-native invasive plant and not your more desirable or native species. There are a few control options with multi-star thistle. You can hand pull it, as we see in the picture on the right. You want to make sure you're removing as much of that root material as you can. You can mow it. Mowing isn't the best option because what will happen is more than likely it'll still put up seed, but it'll just be really close to the ground below where that mower blade is able to cut. But mowing is definitely better than nothing. It's going to probably reduce the amount of seed that plant is going to produce. You want to prevent establishment or spread. Be careful if you're buying hay or if you're putting out any number of things on your property. You want to the extent possible, prevent the establishment of these non-native invasive species. For those who are comfortable with herbicide, you can use one called clopyralid. During the early development, I would say we're probably past that phase this year. There are some other herbicides that you can use at this stage in development. I don't recall what they are offhand. One more option is that you can, the species is somewhat palatable in the early spring, but again, it's palatable before it develops those big spiny seed heads you see on the right side. So probably past that point of grazing. Again, as with everything, you want to get out there and monitor and conduct follow-up treatments. It'll take years to control some of these infestations. Last, I'm going to give an example of a non-native invasive grass. And the example is Arundo donax. This is a plant that we find most often along our creeks and our rivers, but you'll also find it in bar ditches as well. Again, the first step is always make sure it's what you think or you want it to be. Arundo, although it can grow 25 to 30 feet tall, is in fact a grass. You can identify it through a variety of ways. It has a cane-like stem similar to bamboo. However, the leaf structure is a little different and it has this giant seed head that you can see in the photograph. There are a couple of control options, but this is a species that we're pretty limited as far as what we can do effectively. If it's small, if it's knee high, waist high, you can pull it out. You can use a rock bar you got to get all that root material out. Really, once an infestation gets to be the size of what we see in the photograph, the only effective way to control it is with a foliar treatment of an herbicide. If you're by a creek or river, by law, you have to use what's referred to as an aquatic labeled herbicide so that it's not going to cause detriment to aquatic fish and insects and other invertebrates. So you're welcome to reach out to me if you have this plant on your property. You can reach out to me, or I'll put you in touch with folks at Texas Parks and Wildlife about some of the best practices. What I do want to underscore here is do not cut, mow, till, or bulldoze, or even look at this plant in the wrong way, because it can spread. It actually does not spread really from those huge seed heads. The way it spreads most often is by tiny fragments of that cane. And so just one of those canes has about 20 segments, what we call nodes on it. And so one cane could literally, if you were to break that up, could cause 20 new infestations downstream. So we don't cut it, never cut it, mow it, till it, bulldoze it. And here's an example of just a little fragment of that cane that resprouted, in this case on the Nueces River. And again, especially when you have big infestations, it's going to take several years of treatment. You know, these places don't become infested overnight. Likewise, it can take years to control some of these species.
Hey, Daniel?
Yes, ma'am.
Two things. On the Arundo, just an interesting sidelight for the people in Wimberley who remember the Blanco River Memorial Day flood. That was a big spreader of Arundo along the Blanco because it broke off fragments and put them further downstream. But we have a question is, from Constance, what species does Chinaberry displace?
So Chinaberry trees are fascinating. You can find them in a variety of places, but most often I find them, or we would find them in a riparian area in a floodplain, as opposed to up on an exposed hill. And so they can displace a variety of riparian native species. And one of the ways that they can do that, I didn't touch on this, Chinaberries have something called an alleliopathic legacy, such that they can actually change the very chemistry of the soil around them to make it harder for other native species to establish. And so they're going to be outcompeting some of those native riparian species.
There's another question too. Is removal of standard bamboo similar to that of giant cane?
I think it's similar, but I think there's at least one or two nuances. And so whoever is asking that, if you want to email me afterwards, I'll put you in touch with Ryan at Texas Parks and Wildlife. And I know he's navigated that a few times with landowners. So I think it's similar, but not quite the same.
Okay.
Okay, cool. And so with this slide, again, we've emphasized you want to make sure you're doing the correct species identification, you're using the correct methods, and you're doing that follow-up monitoring and maintenance. And this picture is just to give a couple of examples of, good intentions are great. We want landowners enthusiastic and excited about stewarding and healing their land, but good intentions are not enough. We want to make sure we're using the right, safe, and effective methods to control these species, and we're doing so in a way that's consistent with our goals. On the left, this is a Chinaberry tree where the landowner most likely just cut the tree down and walked away. They didn't apply the cut stump method, no herbicide to that exposed trunk. And so when you just cut it and walk away, it's going to resprout. And so here, there was probably initially one mature Chinaberry tree, and now you can see there's just a whole bunch on the left that have overtaken the riparian zone of this creek. On the right, you can see in the back right corner, there's some tall Arundo, although it looks either dead or desiccated at the moment. But most likely a landowner came in here, again, with good intentions, but they mowed it, they cut it, they spread the cane fragments all over the place, such that where you could have just had one really manageable stand of Arundo, it's now spread all over the property. So good intentions are great, but they're not enough. We want to make sure, again, we're using thoughtful, safe, effective methods to control these invasive species. We want to do so in a way that ultimately leads to improved soil and land health, which is to say, whacking weeds, killing noxious plants is not the end goal. It's but one step in a much longer process. And if we do that successfully, we can really improve the health of our lands. And again, we've already outlined the number of compelling reasons why we might want to do that.
Daniel, there's one more question, Daniel,
yes.
before you
yes.
go on, that might be appropriate here. Linda's asking about Chinese tallow, and can you clarify that as an invasive or not?
Yes, so Chinese tallow is definitely one of those non-native invasive trees, similar to Chinaberry. It often grows in the floodplain in the riparian zone, and most, if not all, of the methods that I laid out for Chinaberry would apply to ligustrum. The cut stump method is the most common and the most versatile for non-native invasive trees. I wanted now to offer a different perspective on non-native invasive plants and how to manage them, especially for folks who might recoil at the idea of using herbicides. This also brings us full circle to an earlier part of our conversation, where I showed a slide about soil health and the 5 guiding principles that we can use to heal our land and improve the health of our soils. I think there's a number of folks who are starting to use these same principles as a way to not only improve the health of the soil, but to change the very conditions so that we might be seeing fewer and fewer undesirable noxious weeds, and some more of our desirable annual and perennial native species. And so I've got a quote here from Nicole Masters, who wrote this really delightful book called For the Love of Soil, where she says, I'm just going to read it. I know you're not supposed to read slides, but it's a great quote. I rejoice in people's weeds as they offer clues and insights into soil health and management, and this all equates to opportunity. So when I read that, what I hear is that those weeds, whether they're trees, they're forbs, or grasses, they're telling a story. Perhaps there is a disturbance, an ongoing current disturbance or a historic one that might explain why some of those species are there. Those species might be telling you something about the soil biota that are below or lacking, not below your soil. They might be saying you have some issues with compacted soil. There's any number of insights and clues that those weeds can tell you about your property. And so I think really we're seeing in the field 2 emerging camps. There's sort of this idea of integrated pest management, which I talked about. And I think we're seeing more folks thinking about, how can we use these overall principles of soil health to enhance not only the soil, but the plant communities on our properties. With that, I think I'm nearing the end of my presentation. Hopefully we still have time for questions. Someone asked a while back, hey, where do I find pictures of all these invasives? And so I showed a couple of examples. I love texasinvasives.org. They've got a great database where you can search and find pictures and descriptions of just about any non-native invasive plant found in Texas. If you have some non-native invasive plants on your pond, in or right by your stretch of creek or river, I'd encourage you to reach out to your Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist. There's some great folks. Ryan McGillicuddy works a lot in Blanco County, who really know these invasive species. If you're more concerned about non-native invasive plants up on your hillsides and in the uplands, folks at the A&M AgriLife Extension and the NRCS have some great knowledge on how to manage those. So now just stepping back, again, we've talked about land health, we've talked about erosion, we've talked about non-native invasive plants. There are a whole bunch of agencies and nonprofits that exist really to help you as a landowner. And so I hope as you're thinking about your goals and developing your implementation or your game plan, that if you're unsure about something, reach out to a neighbor who might have a lot of experience. There's so much shared knowledge in this region. So save yourself some brain damage, talk to folks who have seen and learned the best effective, safe ways to heal the land. We're here to help. That's what we want to do. We enjoy doing it. So don't be shy. Whoops. And there's Texas Parks and Wildlife. A few key takeaways, then I'm going to wrap up. Again, be clear on your goals before you just start whacking weeds or making rows of logs and rocks. You want to be clear on what you are trying to do across your property. And only you can decide what your goals, what your values, what your objectives are. Again, if you need help, there are plenty of agencies and nonprofits here to help you. Think about the stressors. Don't get caught up on the symptoms. Think about what is causing that stressor. Why do you have erosion on your property? Is there something that's still causing that stressor? Or maybe it's something historic like overgrazing that happened 50 years ago. But think about what the stressor is and focus on that, not just the symptoms. Again, good intentions. They're great. We want people to be excited, but they're not enough. We want to make sure we're using the best management practices to heal the land. And thoughtful stewardship is, your job is never done. It's ongoing and even multi-generational, and good stewardship benefits everybody. So I just want to thank everyone for doing just that. Again, my hope that I laid out at the beginning was that you learned a new tidbit or two. You're excited to walk your place and see things a little differently. And that you think more before jumping out and doing a lot, that you think more about ways you can slow and sink water, and that you might be able to thoughtfully manage some of those non-native invasive plants, not as the end goal, but as a way to improve the overall land and soil health. With that, I'm going to stop talking. Here is my contact information, and just thanks everyone for joining. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we'll see what questions are left.
Yeah, Daniel, before we get to questions, I know some of the questions are around, the ash juniper, and we've got a question around hackberry. Could you talk about the difference between a non-native invasive and an aggressive native that might, especially some aggressive natives that get a bad reputation because they take over disturbed areas?
Sure. And so again, I mentioned earlier, we're not trying to declare war on non-native invasive plants. If you've got a highly degraded site, you might have a native species like Baccharis, which has a lot of names like poverty weed and Roosevelt weed, that might come into your disturbed site. And it's a colonizer, and over time, it might be decades, but over time, it's going to help trap sediment and build soil and improve the overall health of that site. A lot of folks just don't like the look and feel of Baccharis. Weeds can provide a similar function. If you've got a non-native invasive plant that wants to colonize on that disturbed site, it could provide a similar function in terms of trapping sediment and establishing some roots that provide some stability, but it just depends on the species. It might not be as beneficial to insects, to birds, to wildlife. It really just depends on the species that we're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. I think Roosevelt Reed is a good example, because I used to hate it, but then I came to realize that when the monarchs return to Texas in the fall, it's one of the best nectar plants for them to make their way all back to Mexico. So, I mean, you may hate some of these things. A lot of things get weed in their name that are native, because farmers hate them, but that doesn't mean they don't have value beyond that we might not think about.
Poverty weed is also real pretty when it's in flower with the sun on it. It's silver. Beautiful.
Yeah. We've got a couple more questions. We had a question about what about hackberry, and again, as I said, hackberry is a native. It's one that gets out of hand sometimes that people don't like, but it has wildlife value. Anything else? Sorry, I took your thunder.
Okay. Yeah, hackberry gets a bad reputation. But yeah, it has remarkable wildlife value in terms of its fruit, its seeds and berries. There's a tremendous number of birds that rely on that for food. If I recall correctly, its leaves, at least new leaf production, those leaves are really high in, I think it's iron. And so for foraging species like, say, deer, it's great forage. So a lot of great wildlife habitat. But again, what you leave or encourage on your property, what you thin or control or manage, it's going to be dictated by your goals, your values. But the hope is that whatever you're doing, you do with those ideas of overall land and soil health in mind.
Okay, we've got another question on Johnson grass. How do you get rid of it?
It depends on the scale. You know, if you've just got a few patches here and there, I would cook barbecue and ask your neighbors to come over for an hour and help pull it out with you, and then treat them to a good meal. If you don't, if you don't want or can't pull it all out, herbicides are definitely an option. I think Johnson grass at certain periods of time can be toxic for certain livestock, but I'm forgetting the specifics there. So yeah, I would say pulling it out and or using an herbicide. Another method which won't kill it, but will at least prevent it from going to seed. You know, you can cut it, you can mow it before it develops that mature seed head, which is more of a stopgap measure. So it just depends on the scale of infestation.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy to pull. We've had a lot of volunteers at Blue Hole that have gotten rid of a lot of Johnson grass.
The problem is it goes from upstream.
Yeah, that's the problem. If your neighbors aren't controlling it, you're going to keep getting it. Yeah. Then another question, how should we dispose of invasives like Malta star thistle?
I think it depends in part on how mature it is. If I've dug up a plant like a multi-star thistle, a musk thistle, and it's in really early development, which is to say it hasn't even begun to develop seed, I might just drop it on the ground, you know, as a small way of, you know, armoring the soil. But once it's developed seed, you might need to toss it in a trash bag, depending on what the species is. If you've got a burn pile, you could conceivably toss it on the burn pile. It just depends.
Yeah, and there's some invasives that you can use constructively. I find it fascinating that at the Balcones Canyon Land Preserve, they're taking their ligustrum that they're taking off, and they're actually using them to grow mushrooms in order to enrich their soil.
Yeah, again, if it's a tree, use that woody material. You can use logs, form rows of logs on the hillside to slow and sink that water. You can make wildlife piles. There's many different ways you can effectively use that woody material. But if you've got a bunch of berries on that Chinaberry tree that you cut down, you know, maybe take 20 minutes and pluck them off and toss them in a trash bag. Thanks so much, everybody. I apologize. I think I went over my allotted time, so thanks for sticking it out. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me, Daniel at hillcountryalliance.org. Chris, Betsy, appreciate your hosting. And